All right, let's get right into it. For more than 100 years, there's been this unique and frankly terrifying kind of warfare that's just haunted humanity. You see, it wasn't born from brute force, not from bombs or bullets. Nope, this came from the quiet work in labs and the cold, hard calculations of leaders who were getting desperate. This is the story of chemical weapons, a silent scourge, really, born from scientific genius that was turned against itself.
And that quote right there, that is the absolute key to understanding this whole thing. Look, the physical damage is horrific, no doubt about it. But the real power of these weapons, it's always been fear. Think about it. They're invisible. They're indiscriminate. They're just insidious. They can turn the very air you need to live into a deadly poison.
So where did this all kick off? Well, our story really begins in the mud-soaked trenches of World War I. This is where the theoretical horror of chemical weapons stopped being a concept and became a devastating, terrifying reality.
Just try to picture it. You're a soldier in a trench. You look over the top and you see this eerie greenish-yellow cloud just rolling silently across the battlefield, right towards you. You have absolutely no idea what it is, and then it hits. It burns your lungs from the inside out. You can't breathe. This one event at Ypres, it changed warfare forever. It introduced a brand new and deeply personal kind of terror.
But here's something that might surprise you. Even though chlorine gets all the attention, being the first and most infamous gas of the war, it actually wasn't the deadliest, not by a long shot. That horrible distinction goes to a colorless gas called phosgene. This stuff was way more lethal, and its effects were delayed. You'd breathe it in, feel okay for a bit, and then, hours later, your lungs would start filling with fluid. It was an agonizing way to go. And get this, it was responsible for a staggering 85% of all chemical weapon deaths in the entire war.
So, in World War I, you basically had three main types of these terrible agents. First up, you had the choking agents, like chlorine and that phosgene we just talked about. Their job was to attack the lungs. But then came mustard gas. This was a blistering agent, and it was a whole new level of awful. It wasn't always lethal right away, but its effects were just monstrous. We're talking horrific blisters all over the body, blindness, internal burns. And what made it even more terrifying? It could linger in the soil and trenches for days, just waiting, a constant invisible threat. You can see why they started calling it the chemist's war.
Now, after seeing the absolute horrors of World War I, you'd think the world would have said, okay, never again, right? But that's not what happened. Instead, all that science just went underground. During the years between the wars, and especially during the Cold War, this quiet but incredibly scary arms race kicked off. And it created poisons that made the stuff from WWI look, well, almost primitive.
And here we get to a really fascinating historical moment. In World War II, even though all the major powers had huge stockpiles of these weapons, they weren't really used on a wide scale. Why? Well, it all came down to one thing: the fear of mutual retaliation. Everybody knew that if they used gas, the other side would use it right back on them. So it created this fragile, terrifying truce based on mutually assured destruction.
But while that uneasy truce was holding, something totally new was being cooked up in secret. The world was still thinking about mustard gas, but German scientists, they had secretly invented a completely new class of chemical weapon. They created the world's first nerve agents, things like taboon, sarin, and soman. These weren't just a small step up. They were a massive, quantum leap forward in how deadly a weapon could be. So what makes a nerve agent so different, so much scarier? Well, they don't burn you or choke you like the old stuff did. No, they go after the very wiring of your body, your nervous system. They basically short-circuit the communication between your brain and your muscles. This leads to uncontrollable convulsions, then paralysis, and finally, suffocation, because the muscles you use to breathe just stop working. They are brutally, scientifically efficient killing machines.
And from there, the evolution of these things just accelerated like crazy. The choking agents of the 1910s, they gave way to those first nerve agents in the 30s and 40s. Then you hit the Cold War, and the UK and US developed something called VX, a poison so potent a single drop on your skin could kill you. And that all led up to the 70s, when the Soviet Union took it even further with their advanced binary agents.
And that brings us to what you might call the peak of this dark science, the Novichok agents.
These were developed in total secret by the Soviet Union, and they are some of the most powerful poisons ever made by humankind. They were so-called binary agents. What does that mean? It means you could have two less toxic chemicals that, when you mix them together, create the final, super lethal poison. This made them way easier to handle, to transport, and to conceal.
And here's the ultimate tragedy in all of this escalating science. These weapons, which were first designed for soldiers on a battlefield, they were eventually turned against the most defenseless people imaginable: civilians.
I think the most horrific modern example of this happened during the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s. Saddam Hussein's regime used chemical weapons over and over again, and not just against enemy soldiers. They used them against their own people, against the Kurdish population living in the north of the country.
This whole campaign of terror reached its peak in 1988 with the Halabja massacre. In just one day, Iraqi forces dropped a literal cocktail of different chemical weapons on the Kurdish city of Halabja. The result? An estimated 5,000 civilians, men, women, and children, were killed.
And the devastation, it didn't even stop there. More than 10,000 other people were injured, blinded, or left with horrible lifelong problems like respiratory illnesses and cancers. It was just a horrific, brutal demonstration of what happens when these weapons are used without any restraint on people who have absolutely no way to defend themselves.
But Halabja wasn't the end of the story. The threat just evolved. In 1995, a terrorist cult showed the world that you didn't need to be a nation-state to use these weapons when they released sarin gas in the Tokyo subway. And of course, much more recently, the Syrian civil war saw the horrific return of chemical weapons against civilians, from the huge sarin attack in Ghouta to these crude, yet still deadly chlorine barrel bombs.
Okay, so faced with this horror that just keeps coming back, what has the world done to try and contain it? Well, the answer really lies in this decades-long effort to build an international legal ban to try and put the genie back in the bottle. Now, the first big attempt was the 1925 Geneva Protocol, but it had a huge flaw, a critical one. It only banned the use of chemical weapons in war. It didn't say anything about making them or stockpiling them. It took all the way until 1993 for the world to get it right with the Chemical Weapons Convention, the CWC. This was the real deal. A comprehensive ban on developing, producing, stockpiling, and using them. And crucially, it mandated that all existing stockpiles had to be destroyed.
And here, finally, is some genuinely good news in this story. As of 2023, the organization that oversees the CWC announced that 100% of all declared chemical weapons stockpiles on Earth have been officially destroyed. I mean, that is a massive achievement, a huge win for international cooperation. But, and you knew there was a but coming, right? It's a big one. The key word in that good news is declared. The threat hasn't just vanished. We're still facing the danger of terrorist groups trying to get their hands on this stuff. There's the possibility of hidden, secret stockpiles that were never declared. And then there's the whole problem of dual-use chemicals, things like pesticides that have perfectly legitimate uses but can also be turned into weapons. And, let's be honest, there are still a few nations out there that are either outside the convention or are not exactly playing by the rules.
So, what's the bottom line here? Where does this leave us? Well, after a century of effort, the world has successfully dismantled the planet's great chemical arsenals. That's real, undeniable progress. But the knowledge of how to make these poisons, well, that's out there now. And with rogue states and terrorists still a threat, you have to ask the question, has this silent scourge really been beaten for good, or has it just gone back into the shadows, waiting for another chance?